Oh, yeah. Very good. Oh.
Hello, sir. Niharika this side.
Good morning. Good evening.
Yeah, I'm
Namaskara.
sorry. Namaskar, sir. Sir, we'll be beginning sharply at 7. If you want to
Well, that's in a half
see,
an hour.
yeah, sir, 24 minutes, 20-25
Okay.
minutes, sir. Yeah. So you can start sharing your slides then, if possible.
Can I do what?
You can share
Say
your
that again.
slides out. The slides, sir, that the
Oh yeah,
PPT.
here are my slides. Yeah. Can you see them all right?
Yeah, sir, I can see them. Do you want to go through it once to see the screen?
What do you mean, like changing them? Let's see. So
Yeah.
to change it, I just go like this, right?
Yeah.
But I need to move. I need to move the people over this way, like this.
Okay.
Is it? Mine doesn't. Mine is slightly blocked, but I guess that's a matter of.
Yes. We can see it perfectly, sir.
Okay, here we are.
If you do a slideshow, it can come on a full screen.
Okay, there we are. Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Can you see me okay? I mean, as well.
Yes, sir. I can see you very fine.
Okay, very good.
Okay. So now
all right, so I'll see you in 20
sharing.
minutes, huh?
Yeah. I can request you to stop staring the slide.
Okay. Stop sharing the slide? Okay.
Yeah.
Stop sharing. New share. Your screen sharing. Okay. Stop sharing. Like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
I'll see you in 20 minutes.
Okay, very good. Mm-hmm.
A very warm welcome to one and all. Good evening, sir. And we will officially begin the session. I think, sir, are you ready, sir? Do we start the session?
Yes, I need to share a screen, right?
Yeah. We begin the session with an invocation. I would request Dr. Pushya, who is a doctoral scholar at the Institute and a student of Professor Sangeeta Menon. Sir, if you could shut the screen.
Don't share screen. Okay.
Yeah, sir. We would probably restart sharing the screen post the invocation. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Yeah. That's. I was just checking if you're ready. Good to go. Fantastic. I would request Dr. Pushya to begin today's session with an invocation. Over to you, Dr. Pushya. Niharika ji, if you can unmute Dr. Pushya.
Thank you, Preet, and namaste. Today I will be singing a small invocation on the Lord Shiva. Adideva Mahadeva He Dayanidhe Adideva Mahadeva He Dayanidhe Adideva Mahadeva He Dayanidhe Neelakantha Parvatish He Kripanidhe Neelakantha Parvatish He Kripanidhe Adideva Mahadeva He Dayanidhe Adideva Mahadeva He Dayanidhe Namastestu Vishveshwar Trambakesha Gangadhara Namastestu Vishveshwar Trambakesha Gangadhara Nandikesha Bhalachandra He Pashupate Nandikesha Bhalachandra He Pashupate Adideva Mahadeva He Dayanidhe Adideva Mahadeva He
Thank you so much, Dr. Pushya, for that soulful invocation. I think it's a beautiful start from different time zones. I think we have had a beautiful evening here in India with that invocation on this auspicious occasion of Sri Ram Navami also. With this, I would request our Dean of School of Humanities and the Head of Consciousness Studies Program, Sangeeta ma'am, to introduce us to today's speaker. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Preet, and hearty Sri Ramanavami greetings to everybody, and my namaste. And my big namaste to Professor Stephen Phillips, whom I am seeing after so many years. And I think last we saw, perhaps was in Bangalore, I don't remember, because there was this occasion when he would come to Bangalore and he will spend his time to meet the scholars here in Bangalore, to learn and study with them. So I have very interesting and fond memories of talking with Professor Stephen Phillips in Bangalore and elsewhere. So it's also for me a personal delight to see him today after so many years and on this auspicious day of Sri Ramanavami. Big namaste and warm welcome to you, Stephen. And may I also introduce Professor Phillips, and I think he is one of those scholars who hardly requires any introduction. His works we know and his expertise we all know, but yet a few lines about him. Professor Phillips is Professor Emeritus, currently of Philosophy and Asian Studies at the University of Texas at Austin, and has been visiting Professor of Philosophy at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, and Jadavpur University in Kolkata. He is the author or co-author of a dozen books, including Sri Aurobindo's Philosophy of Brahman, published by Brill in 1984, Yoga, Karma, and Rebirth, published by Columbia 2009. And this book was named by choice as an outstanding academic title. And more recently, he has written Classical Indian Epistemology. And the Knowledge Resources of the Nyaya School, published by Routledge in 2012. And this work presents classical Indian views and terminology suited for philosophy professionals. With Matthew Dasti, he published the Nyaya Sutra, Selections with Early Commentaries, Hackett 2017. And with Dasti and Nirmalya Guha, a short text called God and the World's Arrangement, Vedanta and the Nyaya Philosophy of Religion in 2021. Phillips teamed with N.S. Ramanuja Tatacharya to translate the perception chapter of the monumental 14th century Tattva Chindamani by Gangesha. And this is first by American Institute of Buddhist Studies in 2004 and Motilal Banarsidass in 2008. And a translation of the entire text in 3 volumes has now been published by Bloomsbury in 2020, and with the synopsis available at plato.stanford.edu, we know the portal. And this morning in US and this evening in India, he will be speaking on classical Indian epistemology, Pramana Shastra, with special reference to Nyaya. And I don't think we have anyone else other than Professor Stephen Phillips to speak on this subject with so much authority, expertise, and commitment. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for introducing us, sir. Sir, we could officially begin the session. You could start sharing the screen, sir.
So, Mahodaya, Namaskara. And I know that there are morning ragas and evening ragas, and they're different. So this is very early morning here. I'm actually in New Mexico, so it's even an hour earlier, and it's the evening there. So I will try to put on an evening mood for this presentation. This website, the Stanford Encyclopedia on Epistemology in Classical India, that's a more polished presentation of an overview of the classical Pramana Shastra than you will have today, but today, of course, may be a little more fun. As an introduction, can everyone see this slide all right? It's blocked a little bit for me.
Sir, we can see the screen. Could you make it into full screen, sir, if that's possible?
Make it what?
Full screen.
Sir, you can start the slide sharing. So it will come up into a full screen.
Oh, share screen. Okay, I'm sharing screen.
Philip, Stephen, what you can do is you can click the wine bottle icon, wine glass icon, just below the slide. You see this wine glass icon? You can click that.
Wine glass
Yeah,
icon.
just below that. Just yeah, in that same row, you would see that wine glass icon. That would help to bring up the screen.
I'm sorry, I don't see it.
Yeah, you're almost, yeah.
Waiting, you're sharing screen. All I see, I'm sorry. So you can't see my slides? No?
Okay,
Is that
is
right?
there, Niharika, is there, what is the shortcut for full screen? I'm unable to remember. Is it Control
F5, F5.
Yeah. So if you can press F5 on your screen, on your keyboard.
Fine.
F5.
I'm sorry, more? Let's see.
No, on your keyboard, if you can press F5.
S5. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Just S.
Yeah, I don't know whether it works on Mac. Oh, I see.
Mac.
It won't work on Mac. So for Mac, what is the shortcut? I don't know.
I'm sorry, I don't. I retired before everyone started Zooming. Should I just go on with? You can't. Can you not see the slides?
Okay, sir, may I request you to stop sharing and resharing it again?
No,
In the panel above, there's an option called slide share. You can
Slide
just click
share.
on that. Yeah.
I see. Slide share. Not in PowerPoint or in Zoom?
No, sir, in your PowerPoint, not in Zoom.
Oh, in PowerPoint. Okay.
Yes, sir.
You mean slideshow, right, Niharika? Not slide share, I guess.
But I can just move down the slides. Let me do that. I can't find that format. Oh, slideshow. Okay. All right. Play from start. Okay. Does that do it? Huh. My screen. How's that? Is that it?
Just 1 second. I think it's coming. Just 1 second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, I know that, gosh, COVID is really devastating now in India. My heart goes out to you all there. Have to be really careful. And personally, I was fortunate not to have to learn to conduct classes in Zoom. I retired right before the pandemic hit. Can everyone see everything now? No? So,
I think the screen, I think it's stuck after the previous action. If you could just cut the screen and restart, I think it's okay, even if you don't have a full screen.
Okay, so I should end show, use slideshow. Should I end show?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then stop screen sharing and then start again?
No, I think it's visible now, sir. The screen is visible.
It's visible now? Okay.
Yes,
all
yes.
Right. Okay. So to start again. Theory of knowledge, Pramana Shastra, is a rich genre of Sanskrit literature spanning almost 20 centuries, carried out in texts belonging to distinct schools of philosophy, the various classical darshana, realist and idealist, dualist and monist, theist and atheist, and so on. And every one of the dozen or so major schools from early in its history takes a position on knowledge and justification, if only, as with the Buddhist Prasangika, to attack the theories of others. There are nevertheless many common epistemological assumptions or attitudes, the most striking of which is a focus on a belief source in questions of justification. Mainstream classical Indian epistemology is dominated by theories about pedigree, that is, views about knowledge generating processes called pramana, knowledge sources. The principal candidates are perception, inference, and testimony. Now, there are many issues in classical Indian epistemology across school. Let's start with swataha versus padata pramanya, intrinsic versus extrinsic certification. The Mimamsa school of philosophy claims that certification is not required. Knowledge is self-certifying, swataha pramanya. I think they take this attitude to avoid questions about the authority of the Veda, but that is a controversial point. Vedantic schools tend to agree about this self-certification, swataha pramanya, and they back it up with an argument about swaprakasha, the consciousness being self-illuminating. But many others join Nyaya and disagree, saying Nyaya says that certification requires further cognition. In other words, to know you have knowledge, you have to have a determination of the knowledge status. And Gangesha has an argument about this. He says, if determination of knowledge status were intrinsic to a knowledge instance, then it would not be possible to doubt a veridical perception. For example, a river in the distance. You're not sure, you walk up there and you find it is a river, but it is possible to doubt from the very beginning. So the view that Mimamsa Nyaya has is that there is anuvyavasaya in certificational knowledge, and this is a second order cognition that takes another cognition as object without itself being self-aware. Mimamsa and Vedantic go crazy about this. They say this generates an infinite regress, but Vatsyayana has a really interesting comment on this attack way back. He's the oldest commentator on the Nyaya Sutra. He says, if comprehension of perception or another knowledge source landed us in infinite regress, then everyday action and discourse would not go on through comprehension of self-consciously known objects and their known causes. However, everyday action and discourse do proceed for someone comprehending self-consciously known objects and their known causes. When self-consciously I grasp by perception an object, or I grasp one by inference, or I grasp one by analogy, or I grasp one by tradition or testimony, the four knowledge sources, pramana, according to Nyaya, the apperceptive cognition that occurs goes like this. My knowledge is perceptual, my knowledge is inferential, my knowledge is from analogy, or my knowledge is testimonial. And motivation to seek righteousness, dharma, wealth, pleasure, or liberation proceeds through these comprehensions, whereas if there is doubt, no such goal-directed activity would occur, as likewise motivation to reject their opposites. Everyday discourse and action would cease to be possible if what is alleged were indeed to hold. Justification of regress. So the key view in Nyaya is that of defeasibility, right? At a first level, what we might want to call animal knowledge or unreflective knowledge, prama, knowledge is automatic. We get it whether we want it or not. For instance, with testimonial knowledge, acceptance is fused with uptake. The speaker has to be a trustworthy expert, apta, but we do not have to know that she is to acquire knowledge from her speech. Similarly, we and animals too make inferences automatically. Doubt, to move on, has causes, one of which is controversy, and this is to resolve by Nyaya. And so the Nyaya school is named after this term Nyaya, which is a technical term. And here we're talking about a second order kind of knowledge, where we're trying to get to nishchaya. And so here it's not automatic. We employ the knowledge sources self-consciously. And these are supplemented by suppositional reasoning, tarka, one of the great topics of classical Indian philosophy, which is a lot like those of you who know much about Western philosophy, a lot like the Socratic alinkas, but we'll see some exceptions later. So the pramana that are accepted by various schools, Charvaka, there should be a long A there, Charvaka, is just perception. very suspicious of inferences, I think because inference is used to prove mukti and Ishvara. Vaisheshika and Yogacara Buddhism say perception and inference. They're suspicious of testimony. I think it's because, well, there are lots of reasons. Nyaya accepts 4, as we've mentioned. Mimamsa and Vedanta have different understandings of these and also add to reasoning to the best explanation, and absence, which is a special pramana for perceiving. You're looking for my glasses, they're not on the table, and so I know they're not. I know the absence of my glasses. Now, skepticism is also a very interesting topic on the classical scene, and it's promoted by various schools. Charvaka attacks inference. We can't. So it's a very common argument in philosophic circles in all traditions that we can't know that every instance of smoke and every instance of fire, because no one has that kind of awareness. The Buddhist Madhyamaka talk about a justificational regress. What's your pramana for accepting pramana? And if you tell me, what that is, I'll have another question. What's your pramana for that? So this whole pramana shastra enterprise is bankrupt. Now, the Vedanta, they have a particularly some strands of Vedanta, Advaita, and Sri Harsha, they have some skepticism just about mental, any kind of grasp of the world, and they find various problems that are really interesting, such as if you say there are two things, a pot and a cloth, A and B, and they're related. One's next to the other. Well, but when you try to answer this, you get an infinite regress of what relates the relation to the pot, what relates the relation to the cloth, and this drives a lot of reflection in all the schools. The main answer in Nyaya is pragmatic, as we've seen with Vatsyayana. So with, knowledge is famously thought of in Western tradition as justified true belief. There's some problems with that, but clearly knowledge, prama, and the certificational knowledge, the second level, both presuppose truth. And so a lot of discussion, theories of truth, the Nyaya view is tadvati tadprakadaka, that in the simplest case that you have a cognition or belief about something F and it is F. So what the automatic prama, the lowest level is, we can analyze it very simply. It's an anubhava, an experiential presentation or belief that is true and has been produced in the right way. So all the theories have a theory of non-knowledge, and that seems to be crucial to any epistemological endeavor, in that we need to be able to distinguish good beliefs, reliable anubhava, from those that are not reliable. And so just go very fast, and this is mainly the Nyaya view, but some share it, that there is, this is the most important one, there is presumptive presentation of fresh news with anubhava, so that unlike a lot of skepticism in Western philosophy says, you got to give us your evidence first. This says, no. We start with presumptive. We just automatically have knowledge from perception, inference, testimony, and we might later find out that we're wrong, or there may be some, but But the presumption for any anubhava is that it is true and produced in the right way. To move on, now to come to the various pramana. Oh, there's so much. I was thinking, what am I going to say about perception? All I could do was come up with some questions because it's so complicated. There's so much debate, such a rich discussion across schools. Just here are some questions. Are the objects of perception internal to consciousness or external? Are they restricted to individuals, like a particular cow, Shaboli or Bessie, or universals, cowhood also perceived? How about relations? How about absences? How about parts or wholes of self? Do we perceive self? Nyaya says actually we do. Ujjotakara is famous. What about perception or media like light and ether? Akasha is supposed to be the medium of sound. How about yogic perception, yaukika pratyaksha, ishvara, and so on? I mean, recognition, is that Devadatta I saw yesterday? Is that perceptual? And then there are some very intricate debates between Buddhists about Nirakatavada and Sakatavada, and so on. I want to hurry because I know I don't have so much time. And I'm sorry, I was so inept with the technology. Moving on to inference. There is inference for oneself, swartha anumana, and parartha anumana. Now, swartha anumana is something that just happens all the time. We're always making inferences. I see the cars making a turn, and I know that a certain way is blocked without going through premises and so on. But when in philosophy and elsewhere, when we try to show others some truth, we have to use parartha anumana. But this is parasitic or modeled on inference for oneself. And the paradigm of inference and among all the classical schools, here there's much more in common than with perception. The views about perception, the views about inference, pretty much shared. We have a premise, it's called Puksha Dharmata, that the mountain is smoky, and we have a vyapti, wherever there's smoke, there's fire. Then we have a conclusion, and also very important that there's evidence, a drishtanta of a fiery kitchen hearth, and also sometimes negative examples are given too. The bottom line with inferences was really made very clear in a book by Bimal Motilal, The Character of Logic in India, a wonderful book, where he uses this notation that if a person knows that F as pervaded by G qualifies A, then the person knows that GA. Okay, so where do we get that? Yes, and so going to the next one. And what that leaves out, though, is paramarsha, actually putting together the premises. I mean, you could know that the mountain is smoky and whatever is smoky is fiery, but there's some mental process of putting those two bits of information together so that you arrive at the conclusion the mountain is fiery. And so it's not really, everybody translates paramarsha as a reflection, but for swartha anumana, it's really a kind of sense certainty. Ujjotakara's three kinds, let's skip that. And there are various typologies. To round off a discussion of inference, we need to understand that the philosophic text, this genre, and pramana shastra within that larger genre of philosophic discussions in the text of the various darshana, are framed, and this is probably how the Nyaya Sutra and some of the Buddhist schools really started, by trying to frame the conditions for good debate for the truth, which is called Vada. And in the Nyaya Sutra itself, this is distinguished, and also the Buddhists make the same distinction, and Vedantins and others also accept this, that there are these different kinds of debate. And, you know, where you're just trying to win, that's different from debate for the truth. And in the Nyaya Sutra, it says, look, we have some doubt about, you know, whether when we perceive a person, we perceive the whole person or only the front of the person. Do we perceive his or her back, the back of her head when we're facing them, and things like that? So we want to examine theses and counter theses along by the knowledge sources, perception, inference, also with supplemented by Tarka. But no tricks, no obfuscation, and it's conducted among like-minded people, all sincerely concerned to know the truth. I think the Nyaya Vatsyayana put this in because he's worried about the Buddhists who seem just to be playing with philosophy, not really concerned with knowing the truth, but just to cause trouble. He has a kind of interesting there in the Nyaya Sutra itself. It says, you know, if you've got some people of ill will around, it's okay to use tricks, debaters' tricks, obfuscation. In those circumstances, it's not debate for truth. You've got to protect the truth from the attacks of these people who aren't really concerned with making advances in understanding the world and our place in it and so on. Okay, that brings us to testimony. Now, testimony is defined in the Nyaya Sutra as the true statement of an expert. And Apta, and an expert is a trustworthy authority, such that expert is not entirely an adequate translation. I think better would be reliable expert. And Vatsyayana has a wonderful statement about this. The Nyaya Sutra goes like this: an Apta is a person who not only knows the truth, but who wants to communicate it without deception. And Vatsyayana brings out a certain egalitarianism of the knowledge source, contra the privilege afforded to the priestly caste in matters of Vedic interpretation. He says that even foreigners, barbarians, Mlecha, I always kid my teachers like, I'm a Mlecha, thank you for talking to me, can be experts whose statements convey to us testimonial knowledge, provided as always they know the truth and want to communicate it without deception. Now, Navya Nyaya, later Nyaya, becomes focused on the nature of a sentence and statement, and what holds a sentence together, Anvaya, and there's a lot of discussion of this in Mimamsa, and Gangesha follows Mimamsa mainly. And the motivating idea is that testimonial knowledge is a matter of comprehending a statement, a transmitting sentence, and to be a transmitting sentence, a certain condition must be met. And let me just say that Kunjani Raja wrote a book about the aesthetic theory in India, where he has a very good treatment of this, because the Alankadikas also became very interested in the work of Nyaya and others, and they contributed. This was sort of going outside the Darshana context. So just one of the interesting distinctions that's made is that well, necessary conditions are identified. One is akanksha, another is yogyata, and another is proper presentation or asati. Now, grammatical expectancy is the way the words link together. That Bill kicked what? There's an expectancy, akanksha, for some object of a transitive verb like that. I find really interesting, I mean, they're all interesting, but yogyata is really interesting because this yogyata is, it's not really semantic fitting. It's interpreted almost universally that way. And a common example is the gardener is watering the plants with fire. Well, you know that no gardener is watering the plants with fire. So you can't understand that statement. No knowledge is passed from speaker to hearer with such nonsense. Though that might trigger, in the Lankadikas would say that might trigger a metaphorical understanding. I find this particularly interesting because I think that it solves what's known in analytic epistemology as epistemic luck, or sometimes called the Gettier problem. Say a hearer hears a parrot uttering the sounds, make something up, the cat is on the mat. And so the hearer forms the belief that the cat is on the mat, not knowing that it is a parrot that is making those sounds. Now, it just so happens the cat is on the mat, but that's has no relation to what the parrot is doing. The parrot is not cognizant of this. But so the hearer has a true belief: the cat is on the mat. The cat is on the mat. But the hearer, he or she doesn't have knowledge because it's not produced in the right way. And Gangesha defines yogyata as there being no defeater from the hearer's perspective for the transmitting statement to be true. And if the hearer knew that it was a pair that was speaking, would no longer believe that the cat was on the mat. So that solves one of the most vexing issues in modern analytic epistemology. So move on. What are the defeaters? This is really important because if our anubhava, testimonial, inferential, perceptual, are presumptively true, the real battle is fought over what defeats what in what situations. An enormous attention is paid to pseudo-provers, hetuabhasa, undercutters, upadi, futile rejoinders, clinchers, and various defeaters that are used in tarka. Extremely important topic. Tarka, some of the forms of tarka, this list is by Udayana, the great, some would say really the originator of Navya Nyaya. He has Atmashriya and Yonyashriya, Chakraka and Avastha, and several others. These are used all the time in the philosophic text. Every philosopher incorporates these to try to find fault with an opponent's inference, or in general, whatever is disputed. The upadi is particularly interesting. It's really an additional condition, and it's defined as sadhya vyapyatva hetu of vyapyatva. So you can prove that if you have an upadi, for example, not every fiery thing has smoke. So you can't reason from the occurrence of fire to smoke, because there's a counterexample, hot ball of iron, which is hot, and because there are fiery atoms in it, but there's no smoke. So to have smoke, there has to be an additional condition. What shows that is wet fuel. And so in a way, you could say that the upadi is a corrector. If you add the upadi to the prover, you do get the probandum, the sadhya. And here is a Venn diagram in a little book I wrote that explains the upadi. We can come back to this if somebody wants, and I'll come back to this screen. It's a little tedious, maybe. Here are some of the provers, the pseudo provers. Counterexample, contradiction. This one is really interesting. Counter inference, because it shows that there is a social dimension to not only epistemology, but to knowledge acquisition by inference. And that is, in general, you let's say you have you make an inference where you know that something is H and that everything H is an S. And so you reason that A is an S. But somebody comes on and says, look, A, what you're talking about, is also a G, and everything G is not an S. So even if this is true, even if this is a good inference, if somebody puts up this counter inference, you lose the right to assert. You no longer know this. You no longer know that SA from this until you refute the counter inference, because the counter inference is going to prove.
Sir, you're 1 second. Yeah. Sir, if you could unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, that's okay. Yeah, about out of time, right? These are some famous conflicts that bring up Sat Pratipaksha, formal demonstration, clinchers. We can go, these are very interesting, but let me in. Thank you very much.
Sir, you can take, sir. I don't want to interrupt. I meant that you were on mute, so I just requested you to unmute. We have time if you want to deal with the last.
Excuse me? Say that again.
I said, sir, if you want to deal with the last 3-4 slides, I'm sure we could go through the slides and then end it.
Go through the slides. I'm sorry.
Sorry, sir. For some reason, you were muted. We have unmuted you, and there is sufficient amount of time, sir. If you want to carry on with your PPT, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. So we can have questions now, I guess.
Oh,
I can show my. I can show my slides.
No, sir. I thought you abrupt. I thought you wanted more time. We had.
No, it's okay.
Just
we can go back to my slides. I can even show them here.
Perfect. No.
No, that doesn't come out right, does it? Okay, but yes. No, let's be more informal. Please, let's have some
discussions.
Samvada.
Definitely, we're open to Samvada. Thank you so much, sir. I think you beautifully introduced us to this theory of knowledge, epistemology, introducing us to concepts of Nyaya, and also incorporating excerpts from the Buddhist philosophy, and also introduced us to concepts like perception, inference, and tarka. And I'm sure there are a lot of epistemological issues that you also got out, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions. With this, open the space for Samvada, as sir mentioned. If there are questions, you could raise your hands or type the questions on the chat box. Before that, ma'am, if you have anything to say, Prof. Sangeeta Menon, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I was wanting to continue to hear to Professor Stephen Phillips because I don't think there are many people with such clarity and simplicity present the huge amount of complexity which is available in Indian epistemology in general, and also when we talk about Nyaya. And I think it's extremely interesting to also juxtapose Akanksha, Yogyata, and Asakti, as he was mentioning. And also one of the slides which he showed in the beginning about the number of riddles and questions which are available on perception, and amazing richness, and how do we deal with it? I mean, coming from different disciplines, and particularly some of us working in disciplines related to neuroscience, we know that at times how simplistic the rich experience of perception is made into. And here we see the amount of questions and nuances which is added to this supremely important experience of human life. I just wanted to say that, great, and hope, as Professor Stephen said, we can have some Samvada.
Yes, ma'am.
And people can raise their hand with the icon reactions, not literal hand, but the reactions. You will see the icon for raising the hand, and then Preet can take up. Or you can type your questions in the chat box, and then Preet can call out people. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And I think I see Professor Mas's hand up. Sir, I'm unmuting you. If you could just introduce yourself in a line to Professor Stephen before asking your question, and please keep it brief. Over to you, sir.
Namaste, I am Marcis, linguist from Russia. Means I didn't understand most of what you said. You said it beautifully, but it still remains very interesting. And the question is, the Greeks, do we see the ears of the Greeks in the methods of debating, or nothing is Greek? All is purely Indian.
Well, some I've read papers and gone to conferences where people have tried to show influence. I think Pythagoras is said to have come to India and learned something. There's a very good study of this, a little old now and dated, by Wilhelm Hauptfass, India and Europe. No. This is, I think the language barrier was too great to have very much detailed influence. I mean, it's a very hard question. Certainly there was trade back and forth, and some ideas went back and forth. But no, I don't think the Pramana Shastra has anything to do with Greek philosophy. It's just an independent development.
Thank you, sir, for that answer, and thank you, Professor Masses, getting it. I would request Saurabh, Dr. Saurabh. He's associated with the Institute, sir. I am unmuting you. And he's associated with the Nyas Consciousness Program and also faculty at the Institute. Sir, for your inputs and comments.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Preet, and thank you, Professor Stephen, for the wonderful lecture. And today's lecture was, as ma'am has told, that it is a wonderful and the very complected and the complex areas of the Nyaya philosophy has been like explained in a very lucid, and the whole gamut of the Nyaya philosophy has been elaborated. And I remember Professor Stephen because in 2017 I requested him to guide me in the postdoc fellowship, and he was so kind. He told, "Okay, I'll guide you." And at that time, but then I joined some other institution, so I could not pursue it. So this is the time to thank you also, because you didn't know me, but you was kind enough just to read my proposal and to to help me all the way. So my question is, actually, this is very interesting talk today. One is that how do we see, because some of your works like the epistemology in the classical India and all that, that you also talks about this differentiation between the reflected and the unreflected knowledge in the Nyaya school. And in the contemporary debates on the perception, especially in the philosophy of mind, we find the debate between the conceptualists and the non-conceptualists, like McDowell and phenomenology.
Nirakara and Sakara.
Yeah. So how? So there is a very like a very strong school of the unreflected knowledge in the which is led by the phenomenology, that that we not always require the very conceptual or the syllogistic kind of the reasoning in order to come in order to know. The phenomenological being in the word is something like this unreflected knowledge, which is not like the in the sphere of the ignorance, but is something the part of the being in the word, by which we are able to comport ourselves or to act in the word. So how do we see this unreflected knowledge in the framework of the Nyaya philosophy, and what kind of the philosophical implication it has? Thank you very much, sir.
Well, yes, this is extremely important. That this is the idea that perception, inference, and testimony are processes that produce unreflective knowledge. They happen automatically. We live our lives not thinking about them, but just following the information they provide. And so sometimes we find out that it's only pseudo perception. It's not real perception. In that it's not really, you don't really see Tom over there or Devadatta, because that's not Devadatta, or it's too far away. So there's a factive sense of these pramana that doesn't really, it's not the same in English. Perception is used in English, it's not used factively like that. But yes, in the Nyaya Sutra, Vatsyayana talks about arriving through reflection using tarka and self-consciously, as opposed to automatically employing the knowledge sources, we arrive at nishchaya or nirnaya. And I noticed just recently rereading Shankara's Brahma Sutra Bhashya in Brahma Sutra 112, he starts out by saying, Scripture, the Upanishads give us it's the pramana, but we do inference and tarka to not go just have prama, but to have nishchaya, to have a kind of certainty. That's what we're doing in the Brahma Sutra and its commentaries. We're firming up our knowledge, so the discipline of philosophy is a second order process where we're trying to arrive at reflective knowledge. And of course, the data for that is the automatic level, the first order. But that's not all there is to it. When we arrive at nishchaya, we have greater confidence, and there's a greater barrier to doubt. It's an extremely important point that there are these two levels. Now, with perception, Vachaspati disagrees. He thinks that an amalaka fruit in the palm of your hand, you don't need any reflective knowledge for that. You don't need to, there's no affirming up of the fact that, or the truth of the belief that the amalaka fruit is in the palm of your hand. So it's it varies with the topic and conditions. But thank you for that question.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Professor Stephen. I see a lot of questions continuing the Samvada. Sir, I'm unmuting you. If you could introduce yourself in a line and please keep the question brief.
Thank you for taking the question. I'm Maulik Vyas from Gujarat, India. And I often find this intriguing that in the scheme of pramanas in Nyaya, there is the admission of yogic experience. Now,
Yogika pratyaksha.
And how do they reconcile with something which is occult in itself, that they give us an elaborate scheme of intellectual modes of inquiries, but there is no such schemata developed for explaining the admission of yogic experience within Nyaya framework.
I know. I mean, the Nyayikas admit Yaukika Pratyaksha, but I've searched many texts trying to find much elaboration, because I was very interested in Yaukika Pratyaksha, particularly when I was writing on yoga and yogic experience and sadhana. And in fact, one late Navya Nayayaka, Raghunatha, disavows Yaukika Pratyaksha, not maybe on every topic, but there was a Vaisheshika argument that about atoms, that yogis, siddhas could perceive atoms. And Raghunatha sarcastically comments, he says, go find some yogis and ask them if they see any atoms. So Nyaya is not very good on, I mean, at the end of the fourth chapter of the Nyaya Sutra, I think there's a connection between rational discourse and debate and yogic practice. It comes out very clearly. And I know in also Tibetan Buddhist traditions, learning to debate is part of yoga practice. And this is and also from the very beginning of in the Nyaya Sutra, especially Vatsalyana, the oldest commentator, but I think it's also with Gautama, the Sutrakara, that unlike what we find in a lot of Advaita Vedanta and Madhyamaka Buddhism, study and philosophy helps us on the path. We need to do philosophy in order to maintain our yogic practice, or as part of our yogic practice. And this contrasts, very sharply with the Madhyamaka Buddhist, who thinks that doing philosophy is a real waste of time. But you have to go to Vedanta in the Buddhist schools to find out about Yaukika Pratyaksha. All right, I mean, it's not in Nyaya.
Thank you, Professor. Next question from Shruti Somaya. Shruti ji, I'm unmuting you. If you could introduce yourself in a line and please keep the question brief.
Yeah, I'm actually using her device. I'm Raman Somaya from Mumbai, Maharashtra. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, so my question is regarding the circularity involving pramanas. When Parata Praman is accepted, so a Praman requires some other confirmation, some other object or some other process for its validity. The process goes on resulting in circularity, as Nagarjuna also has pointed out. So can you, sir, elaborate on or explain?
Again, the circularity claim is you see, if one claims certainty from the get-go, then that's just too strong. But the attitude among Nayayikas and many others, the Yogacara Buddhists, is that we act automatically on according to perception, inference, and testimony. David, you made a similar point. He says, I forget my skepticism when I walk out into the street and I dodge the horses and chariots and so on. And then he was probably the most famous skeptic about perceptual knowledge. But he says, I can't maintain that when I'm out there leading an active life. Yeah, I mean, a circularity is a form of infinite regress, and so some of the sting of the skeptical challenges seems to me to be blunted by the admission that we could be wrong. The feasibility, I should have emphasized the feasibility more. I mean, presumptively we know, here's a hand. But on just about anything, maybe not here is a hand, that's not a good example. There could occur some further information that would defeat what we think we know. And we say, I thought I knew. Here in Texas, the favorite basketball team, at least where I am, is the San Antonio Spurs. And I always tell my students, I say, hey, the San Antonio Spurs won the world championship last year. And they say, no, it didn't. I say, okay. Then they give me some evidence. I say, okay, I give it up. I thought they did, but okay, you. So you admit to the skeptic, okay, you give us some reasons to give up our beliefs, we'll give them up. But just to say that there's some kind of infinite reason, sorry, that's not enough. I mean, sure, yeah, and furthermore, we will back up our beliefs with designation of a pramana as long as you can ask reasonable questions. But we don't see that kind of circularity or infinite as a reasonable question. Give us some concrete defeater of what we think we know, and we'll talk about that. But absent that, we'll go on with our lives. We will. Vyavahara, the world demands knowledge for proper action.
Thank you, Professor. Continuing, next question from Chaitanya ji. I'm unmuting you. Please introduce yourself in a line and keep the question brief.
Okay, Professor, I'm Chaitanya. I'm doing my...
Madam, I'm sorry, you're not audible. If you could put the microphone closer. Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I'm doing a MPhil in University of Hyderabad. Okay, thank you, Stephen Phillips, Professor Stephen Phillips, for this talk. So my question is related to cognition of absence. This is something that related to Gangesha's causal principle, that every qualificative cognition is preceded by prior cognition or qualifier. And then when it was pointed out that this absence of part stands as a counterexample, he says that we perceive this part absence as qualificant in the prior cognition and somehow changes into qualifier in the next state. And then in your rendition you said, but I was wondering how come this part options which is perceived as a qualificant epistemically changes into qualifier in the subsequent state as such. And in your rendition, you said there occurs a immediate inference. But I was wondering, this immediate inference is not a part and parcel of Indian Pramana Shastra. So could you elaborate about this, this, what do you meant by immediate inference in our rendition, Tatacharya?
Well, it's the notion of Swartha Pramana. When theorists schematize inference, they look at inferences we make in everyday life, like, I don't know, the stream is flooded, the dam upstream must have broken. There are several sort of common everyday inferences. And so abstracting from everyday inferences, we get the form of a proper inference and then use it in debates. Yeah, so in debates, you know, we're not on the level of the first order automatic inferences that we make every day without even sort of thinking about premises and conclusions. We're making inferences all the time. But I thought your first question had to do with how does Gangesha get from on perception? Maybe I misunderstood you. From the sort of raw data of nirvikalpika pratyaksha, non-conceptual experience or perception, to the savikalpika, where you're actually saying his example is, you know, this is a cow. This is really very interesting topic because this has to do with the Nyaya's realism, and this is hotly debated. It's that our previous experiences of cows are one of the factors responsible for the generation of current perception of Bessie or Shabolya as a cow. These pramana is really a multi-factor view of the generation of knowledge with each one of the pramana. There's not just one simple cause and effect process. It's a multi-factor view. And one of the factors is previous experience. So our previous experiences of cows help us to identify Bessie as a cow on the current occasion. But how about when we've never had previous experiences of cows? And even when we have, there's this pure picking up of a property belonging to the world, gotua, cowhood, that fills the place of what's called the prakana, the predication content, when we come to the savikalpika stage. So really, the view is and it's really the Mamamsaka Kumarala who's responsible for this. The perception has these stages. The first stage, there's this sort of direct contact with the world, including universals like cowhood or being a person or so on, and then that's converted. When we've had previous experience, partly through the impact of the categorization that previous experience is implanted in our minds when we say this is a cow. But maybe I misunderstood the question. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Professor. We'll take next question from Dr. Guru Prasad Rao. Sir, I'm unmuting you. If you could introduce yourself in a line and keep the question brief.
I'm Guru Prasad from Mumbai. I wanted to know, Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says, Yad gatva na nivartante taddama paramam mama. He says, you go to the place where no one has ever returned. That is a place most dear to me. So when we apply this perception and the Nyaya, how do we perceive the place which has not been explicitly said? What is that place is? That's the question. Thank you.
That was what I was just talking about. There is this first stage of perception. Now, that is, I don't think this view comes into Nyaya until Vachaspati Mishra. Several people have pointed this out under, I think, Sutra 110. Vachaspati introduces into Nyaya Nirvikalpika Pratyaksha. and this is this sort of raw sensory contact with the world. After all, perception is understood as really on the basis of touch. Even vision is thought to involve a kind of contact with the object perceived, so that in a way, when you see the wall or person or your computer screen, your body is extending, your vision is going out, you're seeing the thing out there where it is, where there's the contact of the visual organ that travels on rays of light. There has to be light for it to move and expand to the object perceived. But the basic view is that it's crucial to realism that there be this, and I think this is a view that Mimamsa and Nyaya share, but not shared by the anti-realists, the Vedantins, or particularly the Advaita Vedantins, and many of the Buddhists. That this is where the world is determining what we think, or how we categorize what we perceive. This is a cow. There's this contact with the real world, and presumptively it's good contact. Unless you give us a reason for thinking it's not a cow, we're going to take it to be a cow.
Thank you, Professor. Ma'am, Sangeeta ma'am has something to add on. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Preeta. For me, there was a thought which was going on in my mind. And I think in response to Dr. Guru Prasad, Professor Stephen mentioned about touch. And we also use very rich concepts or terms in order to understand the experience of perception, such as contact and touch. I was wondering whether the experiences of touch and perception, do they have something in common? In both, there is
Pratyaksha has the different modalities, right? Touch is just one of them. In fact, one of the famous arguments for self is I am seeing what I am touching. And there has to be a self that brings together these two lines of perceptual information. And if there weren't something bringing them together, like the way the Buddhist thinks, if there wasn't an Atman, a perceiver, there would be these separate occurrences, touch experience going on in one way and visual experience going another way. But no, the Nyayikas say, no, the manas and the Atma unify. That's a kind of Kantian point in Western terms. The various sensory modalities. Now, Sannikarsha, Pratyaksha, it's a big topic in late Nyaya, the various kinds of contact. It's not just contact, there's inherence in contact, there's, samavaya, samyukta, and so on. They have, it's not every, different objects have different ways they are perceived. And I think maybe the biggest problem the later Nyayikas face is a generality problem, because the conditions for perception of an elephant are different from those of perception, say, of a mosquito. I mean, if there were an elephant in this room, I'd perceive it, but I might have to work a little bit to find the mosquito.
Thank you, Professor Stephen. If I may just add to this Samvada, which is ongoing, in perception, there is a distance of the self from the object which is perceived. But in touch, culturally, many of us know that there's more intimacy of the self. Or, when you touch a person in different ways, there is some kind of a relationship which is formed between two people, much more than when they are perceived. So I was just wondering, it's amazing to look at the nature of awareness which is involved in a perceptual experiences and in a tactile experience. I was wondering if Dr. Sabra would like to say something relating to touch, particularly because you have worked on it. Dr. Sabra?
Yeah. So this is very interesting. What Professor Menon has pointed out, because in Merleau-Ponty, like when he talks about the touch, as that he says in the touch, because the touch involves the body, so it has the characteristics of the double sensation. Because when you touch, so you also get touched by that. So this double sensation is in the touch, while in the perception what happens, the perception is always there is some kind of the formal, like in Immanuel Kant, that there is some kind of the formal concepts under which all these kinds of images, or you have used the term like the sense certainty. This sense certainty is always formalized in some general category, which of course has the advantage of this more like a propositional or conceptual knowledge. But as ma'am has pointed out that, but still in the touch we find the more like a intimate or more like a relationship with the things. So which might require different kind of the framework, like what the Merleau-Ponty, especially in his notion of the flesh, has tried to do. So it would be, yeah, so.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Professor. I think that was a beautiful interaction. So many thoughts coming out. We would take one more question from Swamiji. I'm unmuting you. If you could introduce yourself in a line, Swamiji, and then keep your question brief. Over.
Am I audible? Yes. Thank you for this nice lecture and presentation to the learned professor. Dear sir, one small question. Nyaya Shastra says the first moment of the knowledge is nirvikalpaka, that is without any attributes, no visheshana at that moment. What will be the pramana, the means of knowledge at that moment?
Well, a testimony is a very good example of what you might want to call multi-factor causation. There are speaker conditions, sentential conditions, and hearer conditions. Obviously, the speaker and the hearer have to speak the same language. They have to know the same language. And there's maybe a lot of other background assumptions. And the early Nyayikas were focused on speaker conditions and being an opta, knowing the truth and wanting to communicate it without any deception. The later Nyayikas were focused on what it is to be a sentence. And it's very interesting, the debate about, well, even, when does one sentence end and another one begin? In English, I think we're very calm, particularly in written English, we have, beginning starts with a capital and you put a period at the end. But, I don't know, in Sanskrit, it's not quite like that. It's a very interesting topic, and the distinction between or the three requirements of akanksha, yogyata, and asati. Those three are very rich, but there's also a lot more to say about what's required to form a good communicative sentence. And in particular, there's a debate that comes out of Mimamsa about whether or not the information conveyed by the words has to be put together in your mind first before it picks out a fact in the world, or the Kamarla view, which is taken also by the Naiyayikas, that each word has reference in, and not just word, but also verbal endings, pachati. So you know that there's a person, singular, the T ending, cooking. Each individual word refers, and the hearer follows the references, and then at the end sort of sees the fact that the relatedness, the anvita, is actually provided by the world, not by the speaker. It's a really interesting debate, and Gangesha, for one, really sees it both ways. He tries to side with the Naiyayikas, but he, in many instances, seems to side with the Prabhakaras and take a sentence to communicate only after it's been integrated in the head, not in the world.
Thank you, Professor. We'll take one more. We'll take a question from, I think, Gautam sir. I'm unmuting you. If you could keep the question and introduce yourself in a line.
I think Prit Swami Jabasiddhananda had one more question which he posted earlier.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I would, Swamiji, I'm unmuting you. Gautam sir will get back to you for the.
Yes. This is Swami Japasiddhananda from Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Educational and Research Institute, located in Belur Math, Howrah. We are so thankful to NIAS for this wonderful series of lecture. And today's lecture, Professor Stephen Phillips has so nicely presented the epistemology of the Nyaya Shastra. Thanks, sir. The question is, the same question has been repeated the second time. No other special query there. Thanks once again.
Thank you, Swamiji. Gautam sir, over to you. I'm unmuting you.
Thank you, Professor Phillips, for the in-depth talk. I am Gautam Ghosh from Patna, Bihar. I am an independent researcher in consciousness studies. My question is slightly different. You referred Akasha as a perceptual media. Can we say that knowledge exists as a ripple or pattern in the Akashic media? For example, we have the laws of motion by Newton. Whether Newton discovered it or not, they existed. Where does knowledge exist?
In the self. In the classical views, excluding some Vedanta and Tantric texts, that are in the traditions of the Shramana and sadhus, Akasha is thought to be the medium of sound. Ontologically or cosmologically, I think there are different views. It's hard to sort of understand for me, but the Mimamsikas think that the Veda reverberates timelessly in the Akasha that surrounds our world. And one of the views of Vedic revelation is that great rishis have heard Shruti, the Veda, that timelessly vibrates in the Akasha. Naiyayikas don't get into that very much. They just think of Akasha as like light is the medium of vision. Akasha is the medium of sound transmission, and it's not atomic. Akasha is not atomic, but it does ripple. It's an interesting topic. I think they don't quite have it all very well fit into their overall view. But it actually is not given very much attention. But in Mimamsa it is.
Thank you, Professor. We'll take one question from Sridharji. Sir, I'm unmuting you. Please introduce yourself in the line and you could ask your question. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your talk, Dr. Phillips. My name is Sridhar. I'm a PhD student at Temple University in Philly. Rather than a question, I actually had a supplementary question for something that was asked about Greek influence or on Indian thought processes. So I was just wondering if we can think of this in this way, that Greeks never had to bother whether to validate or not to invalidate Vedic truth. So that may have been one of the major distinctions between the two traditions. I was just wondering if
that could be, that well be, because of course, the Jainas and the Baudas reject the Veda. That's sort of a defining characteristic. And, debate about the authority of the Veda is really hot in the classical context and just about all periods.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. Sir, do you want to continue with a few more questions, or do we close the Samvada? There are a few more questions.
I know this is Sayamkale there. I mean, this is early morning. I can probably go on for a while. But you must be, I couldn't possibly do any philosophy after 5 p.m. I'm sorry.
There is a question by Abhishek Tripathi. He says his internet is not stable and he wants me to read out the question. It says, Swartha Anumana of Maya and Swataha, the self-experience exposition of Abhinavagupta for source of knowledge. Please comment how these two can be compared, if at all.
Well, I'm not a great specialist on the Abhinavagupta, but I've read some secondary literature and a little bit of Tantra, Sara, and one wonderful thing is I'm pretty sure that Abhinava says Tarka is the 9th limb of yoga. So he sides with Gautama, the Nyaya Sutrakata, and I think he very explicitly says that you need to stay on the path. You need, the world is telling you, your senses are telling you, that things are intrinsically distinct. But the truth is that there is oneness, and it's to keep on the path to discovery of the unity of the self and the world. You need philosophy, which is a 9th limb of yoga. There's the Ashtanga Yoga, famous from the Yoga Sutra, and he says the most important limb is reflection.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think with this we will end the Samvada for today's evening, and I would want to tell, we have our concluding lecture next week on Wednesday by Professor Arindam Chakrabarti. Sir is going to introduce us to the reality. The topic is reality of the past and the future in Vasubandhu, Kashmir Nayayika, Bhasar Vagna and Kashmir Shaiva Abhinavagupta on 28th of April, 10:30 a.m. Indian time. With this, I would request Amrita, who is a doctoral scholar at the Institute, and she's currently working on the theory of Dhvani and ethnic performances from Kerala, to officially conclude the session and deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, Amrita. Amrita, I'm trying to unmute you. Yeah.
Yeah, Amrita, before you give the vote of thanks, can you just tell us a little bit about your thesis work? Because it may be of interest to Professor Stephen Phillips as well.
Thank you,
Amrita is
ma'am.
a young scholar in our institute, and she comes from the background of literature, but has something very interesting for her research work. Amrita, go ahead.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So I'm currently working as a research associate under Sangeeta ma'am. So I'm doing my PhD, and my thesis topic is related to the theory of Dhwani. I'm relating it with the performing arts from Kerala, and those are ethnic performances from Kerala titled as Therayatam and Sarpam Thullal. So I'm trying to see if the theory of Dhwani can be applied to those performances and to understand what are the cognitive and the cultural aspects related with that. So now moving on to the vote of thanks. On behalf of NIA's Consciousness Studies program, I take this opportunity to extend my heartfelt thanks to Professor Stephen Phillips for consenting with us for the lecture today, for the very lucid and elaborative lecture on epistemology in classical India. Thank you so much, sir, for this very lucid and informative lecture. I'm also thankful to Sangeeta ma'am for conceptualizing this lecture series and for initiating this lecture series. I'm sure that we'll have only one more lecture in the series, but more to come in as further series and all. So thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful opportunity. I'm also thankful to Preet for hosting today's session, and Pushya for that very soothing invocation in the beginning. And I'm also thankful to Abhishek and Niharika for coordinating this sessions and for all the technical support. And finally, I'm thankful to all the audience for your discussions in the Samvada session today. Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Amrita. With this, I would request Professor Sangeeta Menon for her concluding remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Amrita, and thank you, Preet. I think all of you there would agree with me that there's no other scholar whom we can listen to with such clarity and such simplicity in his way of entering the questions and discussion, like Professor Stephen Phillips. And I already got some message from some few others to organize more lectures by him. Definitely, we will keep that in mind. We'll see what is the possibility, and we also will inquire about this convenience in the future. This is an area which we need more discussion, and we need more engagement, and also we need more multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary discussion. And as Professor Stephen Phillips said, a Samvada is very important. And I think, again, I can't resist saying that the nuances which Professor Stephen Phillips brought in, first of all, in listing the questions on perception, the richness which is involved in the very act of perception, that itself is just amazing. And each of that question, if we start discussing, and I'm sure from a Darshana point of view, as well as perhaps an interdisciplinary discussion point of view, we can continue for hours and hours, which of course we won't do that now. So this is just to say that we are very grateful to Professor Stephen Phillips, and I thank him on behalf of all my colleagues, and also the behalf of the director of our institute, National Institute of Advanced Studies. I also thank all the audience to be there, and also for the wonderful questions which you framed, which makes the Samvada more interesting. Now, as Amrita and Preet said, next Wednesday would be the concluding lecture of this series. That's by Professor Arindam Chakrabarti. And many people actually wrote to me, we are waiting for Professor Stephen Phillips and Professor Arindam Chakrabarti's lectures. So somehow these two interesting lectures has also come in conclusion of this series. So with the lecture by Professor Arindam, this series ends, and we are of course looking forward to Professor Arindam's lecture next Wednesday. I also wish to say that if you wish to support this program or initiatives like this, or you have ideas, please do write to us at NIAS Consciousness Program at nias.res.in. And you can also personally write to me or WhatsApp message me. And your ideas and your support is what is giving us the confidence and strength to organize such series. And I also want to say a line of thanks to Professor Madhav Deshpande, who couldn't be with us this evening here in India. I mean, of course, he is in California. So for him in this morning, because of a very unavoidable personal reason, and the series was possible because of his interest and his contribution in very many ways in conceiving this series. So once again, I wanted to thank you all. Also wanted to request, if you have ideas or if you have any other way or desire to support our program in any way you want to, please write to us, please let us know. And we continue to look forward to bringing you these eminent scholars, their scholarship, and also their humility in engaging with these rich topics, which I think is a big learning experience for all of us, apart from their scholarship. And I think that's a value which perhaps we will take on this Sri Ramanavami Day. And I give it back to Preet.
Let me just say, Anugrahitos me.
Thank you so much, Professor Stephen, once again.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, one and all, for being here with us today, this evening, and looking forward to your presence in our next lecture. Namaste.